So a couple of years ago, I helped found a nonprofit organization that has become heavily involved in the sustainability movement. And I also teach sustainability here at UCI, and I have to say that sustainability as a term drives me absolutely nuts. And the reason for that is because it's a vague concept that really doesn't have any definition, and therefore has been manipulated by a wide variety of people and organizations in order to push projects and ideas that at the end of the day aren't what I would call necessarily sustainable. To me, what sustainability needs to become is a grassroots movement that pushes for comprehensively positive ways of legislating policy, doing business, building communities, and most importantly, living our lives as individuals. Sustainability needs to become an integrated social movement of good based on an ethical imperative. Unfortunately, the sustainability movement lacks structure, it lacks clarity, and therefore it lacks a unifying message that will inspire each and every one of us as individuals to become what I call agents of change. I used to say that sustainability lacked leadership, but that's no longer the case because the business community has been very quick and effective in assuming leadership roles, shaping the movement in ways that best suit their interests. That shouldn't surprise anybody, but what's happened now as a result of that is that sustainability has become more of a branded industry unto itself rather than a social movement of good. I go to sustainability events all the time, and a constant theme I hear at all of these events is that if we want the general public or businesses to embrace these ideologies, we have to show a clear and immediate economic benefit. I want you to think about what that means for a second. That means that as a movement, sustainability is reinforcing an ideology that says you don't have to act unless it benefits you financially. Imagine Martin Luther King in his I Have a Dream speech, including the caveat, only if it benefits us financially. That would never happen. And when I think about that, it's really hard for me to rectify the sustainability movement as a movement of good. Another thing that we hear frequently at these events, and we hear all the time, is the need for increased funding for math and science as a way to develop innovative technologies to address the problems that we're going to face. Now, I'm not going to argue against that. That's obviously important. But what we also need is to balance that with increased funding and emphasis on philosophy, ethics, humanities, economics, studies that show us that it's perfectly okay for us to do what's right even if there is no financial benefit. I was very fortunate. I got to get my PhD here at UCIrvine in the Department of Planning, Policy, and Design, where we were encouraged to incorporate interdisciplinary research in our studies. And as a result, I got to go to South America, I got to travel a lot, I got to go into Antarctica, and I'm really proud of my research, and I'm proud of my dissertation, but what sticks out in my mind the most are the personal experiences that I had that highlighted the barriers that I faced, that I think all of us face. That first barrier to becoming an agent of change is fear. Fear of imperfection, fear that we're going to make a mistake, fear that we'll be called a hypocrite. I was in Ecuador a number of years ago. I was waiting to get on this train high in the Andes Mountains. There were about 70 tourists ready to board. And there were about 25 or 30 indigenous women making empanadas and coffee. And while we were milling about, two of the women got in a fistfight. I had never seen anything like that. And within a minute, those two women fighting turned into a full-on melee of about 12 to 15 women, and two of them fell right at my feet. I kid you not, this actually happened. My instincts made me reach in to pull them apart, but then I stepped back because it wasn't my place. I didn't know who was right. I didn't know what was going on. I reached in again, and I stepped back a second time. Finally, the bigger girl looked like she was literally going to stomp the face off of the other girl, and I just was not going to watch that. So I pulled her off. And as I did that, police came in, restored order, and as order was restored, the other tourists in the crowd absolutely lambasted me. I didn't know the facts. I didn't know who was right. It wasn't my place to intervene. And maybe they're right, but I don't believe so. It's important for us to not let fear keep us from taking action. It's better to be real than it is to be perfect. And if you make a mistake once in a while, so be it. But it can be hard because for the most part, as a society, we become rooted in polarized ideological thought, which prevents innovative ideas from coming to the fore and prevents us from really opening ourselves up to innovation. My research was in Venezuela, where I studied the effects of oil on the Bolivarian Revolution, and I spent a lot of time there, and I would attend rallies. Several 100,000 people would be at these rallies, and the passion was intoxicating. It was amazing. And Venezuela is facing a lot of problems. But when I really analyzed the situation, I saw that people, rather than supporting what they believed in, they were opposed to what they did not. And that mirrors what's starting to happen here in the United States. You look at right wing versus left wing, and the choices of ideas come somewhere in between. But if we think about examples like B corporations or social entrepreneurship, they don't fit very neatly onto that spectrum. So we need to add a second dimension. And if we're going to add a second to plot ideas, we can add a third. And that's what we need to do. We need to think three-dimensionally so that we can truly open ourselves up to new ideas, be they technology, be they behavior, be it policy. It's important that we start thinking differently. The third barrier that we face is we tend to think of large-scale government organizations as being the ones responsible for solving our problems, or huge businesses. When I got back from doing my research in Venezuela, I was invited to Antarctica on a sustainability retreat. It was awesome. There were 70 of us from 29 different countries around the world that were all sustainability advocates. We were students, leaders of NGOs, there were corporate executives. And being in an environment where, we're seeing these amazing things, the whales and the penguins and the seals and icebergs and the most amazing sunsets I've ever seen, all of our barriers between us were dropped and we were allowed to freely communicate. This was 2009, and later that year was the UN Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen, and it was decided as a group that as many of us as possible needed to go to Copenhagen and make our voices heard, demand change. That's good, but I thought we were missing an opportunity to address ourselves as individuals and what we could each do. So I convened a meeting, and about 10 or 12 people showed up out of 70. And while they were open to what I was saying, there was still this tendency to want to turn things back and revert to the large-scale policy changes that needed to be made. So later that year, a bunch of people went to Copenhagen. It looked like they had a great time. I saw all the pictures on Facebook. But what happened? Nothing. A large amount of people call it an abject failure, and I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if all the people on our ship that went to Copenhagen took all of that emotional and financial energy and resources and invested it into their communities? I think the impact would have been far greater. But it can be difficult to act as an individual because a lot of times we think that we don't have enough resources to do anything impactful, that whatever we do isn't going to really change anything. A couple of years ago, I guess it was actually about a year and a half ago, my partner and I went to Haiti in order to distribute water filters in the wake of the cholera epidemic that erupted. And these things they're very basic, 5-gallon bucket with a little tube that sticks out of the bottom of the filter. It takes about almost an hour to filter 5 gallons of water. And that first night that I was there, I ran into this guy who brought down these really elaborate water filtration systems that could filter 5,000 gallons in an hour. So much water that they had to hook them up to trucks, and they were going to IDP camps, and I felt like we wasted an opportunity. We had raised a bunch of money and bought these filters that for a little bit seemed like they were going to be ineffective. Well, it turns out that Haiti is a country that has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people living in areas where there's no roads. We ended up hiking 4, 5, 6 hours into these communities to distribute these water filters, and these filters are changing lives. They're saving lives. And because we did that, we then expanded into providing sanitation presentations, education about what cholera is. Now we're building aquaponics systems, so that little thing that we thought wasn't going to make a difference for a little bit has turned into a journey. And that's what we need to understand as individuals. Every little bit counts. Each action we take can turn into another action, which then leads us down a path of true impact. I can't tell you guys what to do. We're all incredibly different people. We have different opportunities and different barriers. We need to decide for ourselves what it is that we can do and take action, but I can tell you this. As a country, we're 5% of the world's population, actually a little bit less than that, yet we consume about 30% of the world's resources. Last year, in 2011, we imported $550 billion more worth of goods than we exported. The vast majority of what we imported comes from countries that lack the social and environmental controls and regulations that you and I have demanded and achieved in this country. If we want to maximize our individual impact, the sustainability movement needs to develop a unifying structure that inspires each and every one of us as an individual to become a true agent of change. If we're honest, if we're informed, and if we truly try to treat each other with respect and dignity, I guarantee you the rest will follow suit. Thank you.